Beloved friends, welcome. A second. There we go. My name is Eric Michaud. I am a host for today's presentation for Baha'i event in South Africa entitled A Guided Tour of the Blessed Beauty. And we'll explore Violetta Zein's new illustrated Chronology, the Blessed Beauty, a dual enmeshed, exceptionally comprehensive timeline of the life and revelation of His Holiness Bahá'u'lláh from 1817 to 1892. Violetta is about to take us on one-of-a-kind chronological journey, highlighting rare stories she uncovered about Bahá'u'llah's life and revelation, discoveries of little-known events, and the challenging artistic process involved in illustrating spiritual events in the life of a manifestation of God. First and foremost, I would like the opportunity to share with you some guidelines to ensure a smooth and pleasurable experience for us all during this presentation today. So just do this. There we go. If you could please keep yourself on mute when you are not contributing. You are warmly invited to... I'm on the right slide. Yes. You are warmly invited to actually stay on mute when you are not contributed, and warmly invited to make use of the chat box to ask questions you may have. I will read them when prompted to do so by Violetta. Tonight's presentation is interactive in nature, so should you wish to verbally contribute or ask questions, please kindly use the raise your hand function and you will be called on to do so. With that said, we will begin with an opening prayer that dear Eddie June will share for us.
All praise, O my God, be to thee, who art the source of all glory and majesty, of greatness and honor, of sovereignty and dominion, of loftiness and grace, of awe and power. Whomsoever thou willest, thou causest to draw nigh unto the most great ocean, and on whomsoever thou desirest, thou conferst the honor of recognizing thy most ancient name. Of all who are in heaven and on earth, none can withstand the operation of thy sovereign will. From all eternity thou didst rule the entire creation, and thou wilt continue forevermore to exercise thy dominion over all created things. There is none other God but thee, the Almighty, the most exalted, the all-powerful, the all-wise. Illumine, O Lord, the faces of thy servants, that they may behold thee, and cleanse their hearts, that they may turn unto the court of thy heavenly favors, and recognize him who is the manifestation of thyself, and the dayspring of thine essence. Verily thou art the Lord of all worlds. There is no God but thee, the unconstrained, the all-subduing. Bahá'u'lláh.
Thank you very much, dear June. Our guest speaker from today is Violetta Zein. Violetta is an artist and a graphic designer. She works for a family school in Pointe-Noire in the Republic of Congo and serves the Continental Board of Counselors in Africa in the fields of cartography and statistic analysis and visualization. In 2020, Violetta and Abid Massimian launched the Utterance Project that you may be familiar with, a YouTube channel and website dedicated to sharing the beauty of the utterances of His Holiness Bahá'u'lláh, His Holiness the Bab, and the beloved Master ʻAbdu'l-Bahá in the original Persian and Arabic languages. She is the author of 2 illustrated chronologies, one being The Extraordinary Life of ʻAbdu'l-Bahá and The Blessed Beauty, which is the one we are going to have the pleasure to explore together. So without any further ado, welcome my very dear friend Violetta Zein. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to see you. We are going to have an interactive event today because I really believe that Baha'i history is best processed when we can ask questions as the questions come. Because I really believe that this is a faith based on questions. A large majority of the writings of Bahá'u'lláh, and for that matter, ʻAbdu'l-Bahá, were answers to questions. The Kitab-i Khan was revealed in 48 hours by Baha'u'lláh in response to 4 questions from a maternal uncle of the Bab. And I have a firm belief that a lot of Baha'is here who are of Christian background asked too many questions at Sunday school. So if you or your children have questions at any point, feel free to raise your hand. I'm going to be presenting as many of the 10 parts of this chronology as I can, but I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to give sort of an overview of the decade or the years that we're looking at in sort of like a spiritual sense, what happens in Baha'u'llah's life during this time. And I'm also going to be highlighting certain events or certain pictures that have meaning to me and that I didn't know, that I learned while I was writing the chronology. So the first part of the chronology deals with the years 1817 to 1844, the early life of Baha'u'lláh, from Baha'u'llah's birth to the age of 27 in 1844, when a couple of things happen, when ʻAbdu'l-Bahá is born and when he receives the message from the Bab and accepts it immediately. Now, I called this chronology the Blessed Beauty, not just because it's one of the main titles of Baha'u'lláh, but because when I was in the Holy Land, I had a conversation with Mr. Dunbar, who is an internationally renowned artist. And I told him, I felt like maybe my attachment to beauty and art was a little bit materialistic. And he said, if beauty was a materialistic thing in a sense, then the title of Baha'u'lláh could never be the Blessed Beauty. There has to be something spiritual that comes with art and beauty. And so in honor of that conversation almost 20 years ago, I decided to call this chronology the Blessed Beauty, and I wanted to start with a work of art. The original image for this, which is one of the very special things about Baha'i history, is that we have granular, tiny details about our history. We know the room our prophet was born in. We know the room that he died in. We know where he was at almost every stage in his life. We know sometimes what he said, when he said it. Sometimes we know the hour he said it. So this is the room Baha'u'lláh was born in, and the picture was quite a bad quality picture. And so I processed it very heavily, and I added light to stream through the window to show the birth of a new manifestation of God. And this whole first part is extremely spiritual because Baha'u'lláh comes from a family that's descended from Abraham. And there is so much prophecies about his coming. So just imagine his birth, but there is so much prophecies from millennia before about his birth. And then once he's close to being born, there are so many prophecies from Sheikh Ahmad about his birth. And finally, he's born. And he is all of these prophecies that you see in bold here. And Sheikh Ahmad's prophecies. And as soon as he's born, spiritual forces become unleashed in his life. So I have a special section called the spiritual forces in Baha'u'llah's early life. I was very struck by how many dreams there were. There are 2 dreams of Baha'u'lláh. This is the dream where the fish are trying to bite him and the birds are trying to attack him and he's untouched. This is a dream that his father has, where all these fish are holding on to his hair and they're just around him and he's swimming. And it's the sort of the world faith that he's gonna build. And then there's all these dreams of other people around, mujtahids and other people. But one of the things that I learned while I was doing this in a little tiny, this is why I do chronologies, because this was in the Revelation of Baha'u'lláh, volume 4, maybe, which deals with Bahji and all this stuff. And in there was a little line from Mr. Tahirzadeh that said that Baha'u'lláh had a first experience of prophethood around the age of 12, probably. He read a story about a tribe that was completely massacred, and it caused so much emotion in him that he had a transfiguration for 12 days. So this is something important to keep in mind, is that from a young age, Baha'u'lláh knew that there was something different about him. And that was really something very moving for me. So all through his childhood, there's so much spiritual clarity. So a lot of the vignettes in the first part are very spiritual. They're about Baha'u'llah's spiritual clarity. They're about Baha'u'lláh as a youth, and how much he spent times outdoors in one of the most beautiful parts of Iran, Mazandaran, which is very heartbreaking when you think that the rest of his life he lived in very ugly places and never again had access to nature until very late in life, when ʻAbdu'l-Bahá arranged for him to retire in Mazray. So he spent childhood summers in Noor, and all of this is Baha'u'llah's spiritual qualities, and just each story highlights the perfection of his character, his spiritual ability to see injustice and to fight injustice, even as a 15-year-old boy. And little by little, until 1832, when his sister marries a boy from the village of Yalrud, two very rich families from the district of Noor. And his sister sees her husband's younger sister, and she is so filled with perfections, and she was so unique that from childhood, Asiye Khanum was known as Navabi, which is Her Highness. Her family called her Her Highness. And so Sari Khanum basically petitioned her father to ask her hand in marriage for Baha'u'lláh. And when they were married, so this is the contract of marriage, which is what a blessing that we have this. And it talks about her character. It's not just Asiye Khanum and Mirza Hussein Ali got married. No, it's this perfect woman of virtue married this young man of virtue, and it outlines all of their the dowry, which took 40 trips on muleback to bring. But one of the things I didn't know is that Asiye Khanum is actually mentioned in the Bible. And this is something ʻAbdu'l-Bahá has confirmed several times. He says that the book of Isaiah, chapter 54, verses 2-5, are a prophecy about Asiye Khanum. And the verse says, "Enlarge the place of thy tent, and let them stretch forth the curtains of thine habitations. Spare not, lengthen thy cord, and strengthen thy stakes, for thou shalt break forth on the right hand and on the left, and thy seed shall inherit the Gentiles, and make the desolate cities to be inhabited. For thy maker is thine husband, the Lord of hosts is his name, and thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, the God of the whole earth shall he be called." I'm scrolling too fast. I apologize. I'll try not to scroll too fast. So one of the really interesting things about Baha'u'lláh and Nawab, which I thought was fascinating, was they were married for 9 years before they had a child who lived past the stage of infancy. ʻAbdu'l-Bahá was their third boy. Their first two, Kazim and Ahmad, I think, Kazim and Mehdi, died in infancy. And they spent the first 9 years of their marriage ministering to the poor. And they were called the father and mother of the poor. And they were from very wealthy families, and normal people would have just amassed riches and art and like fancy furniture and furnished their homes, and just, it was wealth upon wealth when they were married, because both families were very rich. And no, They didn't spend time with people of their rank. They didn't attend state functions. They didn't have frivolous pastimes. They just imagine, this is one thing I did when I was writing the chronology. I just imagined a very young Nawab and a very young Baha'u'lláh, both still Muslims, and just spending all their time with these people in need. Everyone loved them. And then finally, well, after some troubles, Haji Mirza Akazi was the Grand Vizier of the Shah. And he is the Antichrist of the Babi revelation. He did everything he could to demolish people around him. He's an extremely jealous man. And the reason he ruined Mirza Buzurg was because Mirza Buzurg wrote a letter in which he somewhat criticized him, so he ruined him. And Baha'u'llah's father lived in complete poverty. And he got his wife to divorce him, and in the divorce, take everything he owned. He had to live with one of his other wives in a home. And after that, Baha'u'lláh actually never again lived in a home he owned, because that house here that we know very well in Iran, this home here, this one here, this one here, and also this one here, it's the same one. This is not the house of Baha'u'lláh in Tehran. This is the house of his father. They were kicked out of this house in 1835, shortly after Baha'u'llah's marriage to Asiya Hanum, and they had to live in a rented house. They rented basically for the rest of their lives until very late in Baha'u'llah's life when they were able to buy Bahji. But for 4 decades, they lived in rented houses. And shortly after, so a few years after, so they lived for the 9 years of their early marriage were in this rented house that was near the gate of Shimran. And Baha'u'llah's father had died. And 2 things happened on the 23rd of May, 1844. The first, unbeknownst to Baha'u'lláh and Asiya Hanum, was that the Bab declared his mission. He declared his mission on the 23rd of May at sunset. And how many kilometers? 700 kilometers, so 400 miles north, east. So this is Shiraz here. This is where he declares his mission. And at sunset, so 700 kilometers north, if ʻAbdu'l-Bahá was born at midnight, this is really my own thinking. This is not Baha'i history speaking. This is me as a woman speaking. If ʻAbdu'l-Bahá is born at midnight in Tehran, what are the chances that he was starting to be born at the very moment that the Bab declared his mission? 2 births happening at the exact same time. And by midnight, ʻAbdu'l-Bahá was born. So the Bab opened the Baha'i dispensation, and just 700 kilometers north, ʻAbdu'l-Bahá, the glass to receive all the teachings and put them forth in the world as a perfect exemplar, the perfect vessel, was born basically exactly at the same time. And what happened was that the Bab sent all of the letters of the living, including Mullah Hussein, on many missions. And Mullah Hussein was told to go to Tehran and find the pearl that was hidden in Tehran. And so he just operated on spirit, and he would go out every day looking, and one thing caught his eye, and he started hearing of the perfections of Mirza Hussein Ali. And he became convinced that Mirza Hussein Ali was the reason he was in Tehran. So he asked Mullah Muhammad Imullaim to give him a message. And this is not the tablet that the Bab wrote to Baha'u'lláh that first night, but it is a tablet the Bab wrote to Baha'u'lláh. So it's a symbolic illustration. he gave the tablet to Mirza Musa, who was 1 or 2 years younger than Baha'u'lláh. So Mirza Musa was Baha'u'llah's only full brother and was with Baha'u'lláh every single day of his life, from the age of 1 all the way to the time he died in 1887. Every step of the way, every single thing that Baha'u'lláh lived through, Mirza Musa lived through. And on the day he received this tablet from the Bab, Mirza Musa was there, and Baha'u'lláh immediately read one line, accepted it. And then what did he do, which is something I found really amazing. He had had 2 baby boys with Asiye Khanum, and finally his 3rd child lives, and he would be 2 months old in July. And Baha'u'lláh trusted Asiye Khanum with his boy, 2-month-old boy, and for 2 months he went travel teaching in Noor. And this is something I also didn't realize, is that his proclamation journey was a very intense proclamation journey. Thousands of people became Babis. Right after he received the message, he immediately went to his homeland and started proclaiming. And his fame grew, and so many extraordinary things happened. People declared on the spot. This dervish by the side of the road looked at Baha'u'lláh and immediately recognized the promised one. Immediately, he composed a poem that he would sing as Baha'u'lláh was walking through Noor. And he said, "Thou art the day star of guidance. Thou art the light of truth. Unveil thyself to men, O revealer of truth." And Baha'u'lláh would not for the next 9 years. But this dervish, 2 months after he accepted the revelation, saw the truth of Baha'u'lláh. So that is part 1. It's quite spiritual. It's quite intense. Part 2 of the Blessed Beauty is the years 1844 to 1853. So 9 years during which Baha'u'lláh is 27 years old to 36 years old. And these years chronicle the rise of the Babi revelation and its climax after so much crisis and victory and so much persecution by the Iranian government into the birth of the Baha'i revelation in the Siyat-Chal. So as soon as Baha'u'lláh declared, his life and the life of his family completely changed. Asiye Khanum, and this is one thing that's extremely important, is I really like to, as much as I can, emphasize the role that the women played in the life of Baha'u'lláh, because to me, when you bring in the women, so the daughter of Baha'u'lláh and the wife of Baha'u'lláh, you get 3-dimensionality, you get texture, because women bring something into the history that is intangible, that is spirit, and that is love, and that is welcoming, and that is kind, and that is empathic. And that is what Asiye Khanum did. In the house of Baha'u'lláh in Tehran, and in the house of Baha'u'lláh in Baghdad, Asiye Khanum created an environment that was constantly welcoming to people who would come for refuge, and Babis and not Babis and Muslims and women, and who was behind creating that warm, welcoming atmosphere? It was Asiye Khanum. And so she encountered all of the early heroes of the faith, so many letters of the living. And at the same time, 2 of her 3 children were born during this time. Bahiya Khanum was born in 1846, and Qudus came through and met Baha'u'lláh. And as the Bab was being led to Azerbaijan, Baha'u'lláh had an opportunity to send a message to him. And this message that Baha'u'lláh sent the Bab, this is where the Bab was when Baha'u'lláh sent him the message. It was called the village of Kulain. And this message that Baha'u'lláh was so kind to send the Bab, such a thoughtful gesture, gave the Bab joy for months and months. Actually, for 2 years, it gave him joy. For nearly 2 years, until the Bab received news of the massacre at Sheikh Tabarsi, he was sustained by the kind message that Baha'u'lláh sent him as he was on his way. And then the Bab was imprisoned in Mahkou, but November 1847 is an interesting date because it is the first time Baha'u'lláh is imprisoned in Iran. And so one of the things that I discovered too during this chronology is something I didn't know, is that the Bab and Baha'u'lláh are twin manifestations. But it's more than that. It's not just that we have two manifestations of God for the Baha'i dispensation. It's not just that they were born 1 day apart and 2 years apart in the Muslim calendar. There's so many like mirrors in their lives. For example, both the Bab and Baha'u'lláh were imprisoned 3 times in Iran and were tortured once by Bastinado in Iran. So this is Baha'u'llah's first imprisonment. And the Bab is already imprisoned for the 2nd time now in Mahkou, and then the 3rd time in Chihrik. But this is Baha'u'llah's first imprisonment in Iran. And it only lasted a few days until pressure released him. But he rescued Tahirih from Ghazvin. And this is a very significant thing because Tahirih is famous for many things. But for me, I realized the most extraordinary aspect of Tahirih is that there are only 2 women I know of in the Baha'i dispensation that instantly recognize both the Bab and Baha'u'lláh instantly. One is Khadija Bagum, the wife of the Bab, and the second is Tahirih. She saw the Bab in a dream and then instantly accepted him when she read one line in the Qayyum's Asma. But then when she walked into Baha'u'llah's house, she instantly recognized that it was him, that he was the one whom God shall make manifest. But more than that, Tahirih had been writing poetry about Baha'u'lláh, referring to him as Baha from 1844, so 4 years before she even stepped into his house. And more than that, Tahirih not only recognized the Bab and Baha'u'lláh, but she recognized the station of ʻAbdu'l-Bahá instantly. She would not let ʻAbdu'l-Bahá off her knees when she was in Baha'u'llah's house. And when people would say, why are you spending time with this child? He said, do you want me to leave my Lord? She had her spiritual instincts were so perfect. I don't think anyone in the lifetime of Baha'u'lláh recognized instinctively the station of the Bab, Baha'u'lláh, and ʻAbdu'l-Bahá, all 3, but Tahirih did. And this is shortly before Badasht. So all of these stories with Tahirih are leading to the conference of Badasht, where Baha'u'lláh attended. He left his family with Mirza Musa. And he, at this point, must have still had quite enough money from his past sort of childhood as a son of a minister to rent in Badasht 3 private gardens and cater food for all the participants for the 13 days of the conference. It was all taken by him. And so it's almost like, if you imagine at this point in this map, you see at the point that Badasht conference is happening, the Bab is in Chihrik, as far northwest as you could possibly get in Persia. And Badasht is sort of in the middle. And Baha'u'lláh is on the ground in Badasht, and he's organizing the entire conference. He is managing it in a brilliant way where he's controlling what's happening and making sure everybody's having this experience. And the whole purpose of the conference of Badasht was to promote, to inaugurate the dispensation of the Bab. But he did everything in such a sort of selfless way that no one knew he was organizing everything. No one knew. Everybody thought the Bab was doing it. And so Baha'u'lláh every day revealed new prayers. Every day revealed new prayers. No one knew who was revealing. Every day gave a new name to each of the participants. And what's very mysterious is that the Bab in Shirik, as soon as the conference was over, he wrote tablets to all these participants, addressing them by their new names, right? So there's not enough time for him to get all the information. So we called, Mirza Hussein Ali is now Baha'u'lláh. No, this connection, the spiritual connection between the Bab and Baha'u'lláh, where Baha'u'lláh was doing so much work on the ground for the Bab, and you have to think they were in such spiritual connection to be able to work almost as one for this conference. And of course, the very climax of this conference was when Tahirih removed her veil, because it was the greatest symbol of Islam that is put behind us. And so that is the most recognizable sign that a new dispensation is here, is the veil is no longer. And only a woman could have done that. During this conference, they changed the direction, they changed the way that they prayed, they changed the direction they prayed in. And Baha'u'lláh continued on after, so the conference of Badasht ended sometime in, let's look at the time. So July 1848. So this is all, Baha'u'lláh paid for the whole conference of Badasht. And then from July to December, Baha'u'lláh is traveling all through Mazandaran, all of these stops here. So many things happen all through here, slowly making his way to Fort Tabarsi, while the Shah, the former Shah, the Muhammad Shah, dies and Nasruddin Shah becomes the Shah. So from September to October, the Babis who were in Sheikh Tabarsi were protecting themselves because they were trying to get Qudus liberated, but they sought refuge in this sort of shrine, the shrine of Sheikh Tabarsi, and they started protecting themselves by building reinforcements. It wasn't an attack. They were really protecting themselves. And Baha'u'lláh visited them and toured. And when he visited them, Mullah Hussein, for the first time, saw him. Mullah Hussein had met Baha'u'lláh several times. He had met him when he handed him the scroll in July 1844. He had met him on the way to see the Bab and on the way back sometime in 1846 or 1848, sometime around 1846, 1847. But then he saw him again in Sheikh Tabarsi, and all of a sudden, just like Tahirih, he saw him for who he was and realized the Bab is the promised one. The Baha'u'lláh is the promised one. And he was just, he was very humbled and just was so overwhelmed by this realization. But Baha'u'lláh had to leave because he wanted to assist them, but he didn't have any money. He'd been gone from Tehran for months, for June, July, 6 months almost. So he no longer had any money. So he said, we have to go back to Tehran and I will come back to assist you like as soon as I can. So by early December 1848, so a month or two later, he was on his way back to Fort Tabarsi and was captured. And this is Baha'u'llah's second imprisonment in Iran, December 1848. But it is not just Baha'u'llah's second imprisonment in Iran, it is also his first torture. This is where Baha'u'llah is tortured by the bastinado, which is whipping the bare soles of someone's feet, which is a torture that is extremely cruel because it is made only to inflict as much pain as possible. Some torture is meant to cause death, but bastinado is made just for the joy of seeing someone tortured in the part of their body where they have the most nerve endings. And when the governor of Amul returned and he saw what they had done, he had visited Sheikh Tabarsi and was just, he was just so touched by what he had seen at Sheikh Tabarsi that he treated Baha'u'lláh very well, and Baha'u'lláh left. And this was followed by a year of heroism on the part of the Babis. This is a very difficult year between 1849 and 1850. All of these were uprisings. So we'll start with which is the first one. The Sheikh Tabarsi was the first upheaval. Then there was Nayriz. Then there were the 7 martyrs of Tehran. Then there was the upheaval in Zanjan, and then the Bab was martyred in Tabriz. This is what happened in 1849, 1850. And if you can believe it, in this year is the year where the most gentle, pure soul ever was born. In the middle of this year is when Mirza Mehdi was born. In the middle of all this bloodthirsty upheaval and martyrdom of all these Babis. After the summer, and after the martyrdom of the Bab gave Baha'u'lláh his personal effects and gave him a tablet that was shaped like a haikal, not this tablet, another one. He gave him some prayer beads and rings, not these things. These items are symbolic. It was items like this that the Bab sent. And Baha'u'lláh became a target. And he was told in no uncertain words, please leave Iran for some time. But Baha'u'lláh waited a year until he was able to get the remains of the Bab. And then he went to Karbala for about 8 months. And what's interesting about Karbala is that Karbala, Iraq has an extremely special place in the history of the faith, because for 50 years before the Bab's declaration, Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim were in Karbala telling people this was going to happen. The first believers, the first Babis, like Mullah Hussein, came from Karbala. He's the one who found the Bab. Tahiri went to Karbala and arrived there a month after Sayyid Kazim had died, and she took over his study. She took over with the blessing of Sayyid Kazim's widow, and she taught in Karbala. Karbala is where Tahiri became a Baha'i. The Bab visited Karbala and met Sayyid Kazim in person in 1841. And then Baha'u'lláh came to Karbala in 1852, 2 years after the passing of Baha'u'lláh, of the Bab. So Karbala is like a very, very special place. It has the twin shrines of Shia Islam. So he spent time there, and it was an extremely mystical time of his life. People recognized his station. It was just, it was very powerful. And he found people who had been taught by Tahiri, and he guided them back to the right path, because they had been taken in by some charlatan. And he returned in May 1852. And for 4 months, he was the guest of his friends in Shimran, in Afshi, near Tehran, high up in the mountains where it was cooler. Then the attempt on the Shah happened. And what's very fascinating about this is we all know the story of how Baha'u'lláh was apprehended, but what we don't know is something that I discovered by reading a small line in a paper, is that 10 days after Baha'u'lláh was apprehended is the first time Baha'u'llah's name is ever printed in a newspaper, in a government newspaper of Persia. And this is the paper which was given to me by Mr. Mujan Moment. And the little stars that you see here, these are the 2 paragraphs that talk about Baha'u'lláh. One says Baha'u'lláh is imprisoned with some Babis, and the other one says they're imprisoned for life. And I really like this line here. As a aside, the 16th of August is when Baha'u'lláh was put in the Siachal. Did you know that Tahiri was born the same year as Baha'u'lláh, 1817? And did you know that she was martyred on the same day he entered the Siachal? To me, that's fascinating. I mean, so this is about August, 26th of August. Around October, and Mujan Moment estimates this happened after the Summer Holocaust, which is a term used by Hand of the Cause Mr. Balyuzi, foremost historian of the life of Baha'u'lláh. Tahir was martyred on the 16th of August, 17th of August, and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of Babis were martyred in the summer in Persia. Right before, 4 months before the revelation, between the 16th and the 27th of October, 1852. These are dates that were uncovered recently by Mr. Momin, based on research that he's done. So we have a fork of about 9 days during which this is when Baha'u'lláh first received the revelation. And if you go to the chronology after this talk, you'll see that I outline, we have 5 or 6 different first-person testimonies from Baha'u'lláh where he describes 5 different ways how the revelation poured over him. And it's really interesting because and here they are. This is a compilation right here. There's in the Gleanings, in Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, Summons to the Lord of Hosts. He speaks about it in different writings. So if you go to the chronology, you'll see that list. This is a very, very interesting. This is the only revelation of Baha'u'lláh that we have dated within the shadow of a doubt to Iran, when he was still in Iran, the Rashi Amma, and it's a poem, it's a mystical poem, Clouds from the Realms Above, about the revelation. And you can listen to it in its original Arabic, in its original Persian, if you click on this graphic. Shortly after this, of course, Baha'u'lláh was released and was sent to Baghdad with Asiye Khanum, who was pregnant. She was probably 6 weeks pregnant at the time. And they had to leave behind Mirza Mehdi, who would not see them for 7 years, I think. So when this is the full sort of journey, which was done by a Persian researcher, and I redid the map. And this was in the middle of January to April, through mountains with a pregnant Asiye Khanum, camping and uncamping. And of course, in between these, they stopped, right? So this is only the places that we know, but they must have stopped 100 times because it was 1,000 kilometers, so 600 miles. And they were on muleback. And they arrived in Baghdad. And shortly after they arrived, Mirza Yahya arrived. Mirza Yahya was the nominee of the Bab. The Bab had named him his nominee. And he is, one of the things about Mirza Yahya is that he is an extremely cowardly and paranoid person. So throughout his whole life, he would always live in disguises. And he arrived and started selling shoes in the market, or slippers, shoes and slippers. But he was joined by Sayyid Muhammad, who was a failed theology student, an extremely very jealous person who played with Mirza Yahya, and Mirza Yahya became his puppet. And they began destroying what little was left of the Babi community and spreading rumors about Baha'u'lláh and causing discord. And I mean, there's so much that they did. It would take too long to explain. Suffice it to say, they caused so much trouble that Baha'u'llah's heart was absolutely broken. And towards the end, one night, shortly before Baha'u'lláh left for 2 years in Kurdistan, Mirza Akadjan, his amanuensis, saw Baha'u'lláh walk out of his house in the middle of the night with his nightcap on. And he was so perturbed. He said, these creatures are the same creatures, speaking about Mirza Yahya and Sayyid Muhammad, who for 3,000 years have worshipped idols and bowed down before the golden calf. Now too, they are fit for nothing better. What relation can there be between this people and him who is the countenance of glory? What ties can bind them? How can they see the truth? Baha'u'lláh would say, is there any removal of difficulties? He was in such pain, he would say that prayer 500,000 times a day, day and night, to the point where he could no longer. And he left. And he left with one servant who was killed very shortly after they left, and he was left all alone. And he did something every manifestation of who God has done before. He secluded himself. And this is a collage of all of the places the manifestations of God have secluded themselves. The Sinai desert for Moses, the Judean hills for Jesus, the plains of India for Buddha. Every manifestation of God has secluded themselves. And he lived a life for 1 year, from 1854 to 1855, he lived as Darvish Muhammad, a Persian dervish, on the mountain Sargalu. So he lived in the caves of the mountain, and when the weather became bad, he would take shelter in stone cottages. But in Baha'u'llah's life, one of the threads is that every single time he tries to conceal his greatness, it never works, because you can't conceal the sun, you know? And so his fame began to spread from the mountains. The Kurdish people of Iraq are the first people in the world who got to see the glory of Baha'u'lláh before everyone else. Because Baha'u'lláh helped a little student one day with his handwriting, and the child ran back to Suleymaniye and showed everybody what the dervish had done, and people from the city came to find him. And they basically convinced him to come and live in Suleymaniye. And Baha'u'lláh was very quiet, you know, trying to not draw attention to himself, but he never, and this is why I say the Baha'i faith is a faith for people who like to ask questions, because even though he kept himself concealed and kept himself to himself and didn't volunteer information, he never once refused to answer questions. So anytime people had questions, he would answer. So they asked him to comment on the Futuhati Makkiyeh, and he said, I've never read the book, but if you read it to me, I can comment on it. So that's the first thing they did. They read through this whole book, and his commentary was extraordinary. And they said, they said what a lot of people say, that we believe you completely, but can you just do this one extraordinary thing so we believe you even more? There was a poem revealed by Ibn Farid. It's a 12th century masterpiece called Hasidi Tayyeh. It's unanimously considered the best Arabic mystical, the height of Arabic. They said, can you just do the same thing? It was 760 poems in a very specific type of verse. And Baha'u'lláh basically dictated it, but he dictated it. His poem was Khassiye Ivarkaye, the Ode of the Dove. And what he did was he exceeded their expectations. His poem was 3 times the length as the original, the exact same rhyme and meter, and the subject of Baha'u'lláh was infinitely more mystical and infinitely more spiritual. And at the end, Baha'u'lláh told them they could only keep 127 verses. The rest is lost to us, because Baha'u'lláh believed it was too early, the subject matter was too elevated. And so this 127 verse apparently is still circulated as a work of art of Arabic mystical poetry. So during this whole time, Baha'u'llah's family was looking for him, and they eventually found him because of these tales of greatness of this dervish that they found in the mountains. And these are all Kurds, an homage to the Kurds who saw Baha'u'llah's greatness before everyone else. These are Kurds from different regions of the Ottoman Empire. And they sent very intelligently, instead of sending a Persian, they sent an actual Arab Babi, Sheikh Sultan, who's very, very smart, because he arrived in Suleymaniye and he realized the people of Suleymaniye love Baha'u'lláh so much. If he came right out and said, I come to take him back to Baghdad, they would probably have killed him. So he just bided his time and was very diplomatic and extremely tactful. And he brought letters of people begging Baha'u'lláh to come back, from his children, from his family, but also from Mirza Yahya, who for 2 years had done everything he wanted with the Babi faith, gotten himself into so much trouble. The name of the Babi faith was totally tarnished, and he knew Baha'u'lláh had to come. So Mirza Yahya went, I mean, there's no other way to say this. He went completely insane while Baha'u'lláh was gone. The name of the faith was dragged through the mud. Babis were ashamed to call themselves Babis. The worst thing Mirza Yahya did was he took the second wife of the Bab, married her, and then a month later gave her to Sayyid Muhammad in marriage, staining the name of the Bab. And so Baha'u'lláh returned to Baghdad, and at first it was a very joyful reunion with his family. Asiye Hanum had kept the very last piece of treasures from her wedding, a very expensive red fabric that's sort of like velvet, and she had made a robe for Baha'u'lláh, sewed it, waiting for him to come back. She had sewed it so lovingly. And the children, they saw a dervish, and they saw their father, and then he would tell them everything about Soleimani, what he ate, what it was like, what the people were like, everything. And shortly after, the Mirza Musa got married to the daughter of the man who went to get Baha'u'lláh and Soleimani. So that was happy news as well. But when Baha'u'lláh was faced with the state of the Babi community, he was so just horrified. I mean, they assassinated Dayan. Dayan is a Babi who had a very mystical station. He was elevated by the Bab and Baha'u'lláh as the point of the bayan, as the repository of the knowledge of God. We don't know much about Dayan, but he had a very high station. And Mirza Yahya was so threatened by him that he had him assassinated. He had him killed. And it was so hard for Baha'u'lláh that at first he didn't very much leave the house for the first few months. But then what happened was a period of 7 years between 1863, 1856, and 1863, where you see Baha'u'lláh recreating the Babi community. So what he's going to do is he's going to take this broken Babi community and he's going to rebuild it stone by stone into a Baha'i community on the edge of the declaration so that they're ready for the declaration. But of course, they don't realize that's what he's doing. But what is Baha'u'lláh doing in this 6 years is he is teaching them very noble behavior and character and sort of like reshaping their character and molding integrity. So they go from being a hated community to a beloved community and to a respected community. And so slowly, these are some of the things that happen. So of course, when he returns from Kurdistan, Baha'u'lláh starts to reveal. He reveals the hidden words. He reveals the 7 valleys and the 4 valleys. Another thing is where Asiya Hanum plays a big role is he never moved in 7 years. In Adrianople, he moved 8 times. In Baghdad, he never moved. He was in the Most Great House the whole time. So there was always this one place where everybody could come if they wanted to hear Baha'u'lláh speak. And they would be received because Baghdad is unique in every single one of Baha'u'llah's exiles for several reasons. One is Baha'u'lláh never moved, same house. He received everyone, received a lot of Muslims, a lot of Jews, a lot of Christians, a lot of Kurds. And he spent every day, an hour and a half, morning and afternoon and morning, teaching the faith in the cafes of Baghdad, which he never did again. So it's an extremely, extremely social time for Baha'u'lláh, where he's building the roots of the teachings. And he's always you can always find him. If you want to talk to Baha'u'lláh, you can go to one of his cafes where you know he's going to be either morning or afternoon. You can go to his house. He's reachable. He talks to everyone. And this sort of the machinery of like of talking gets going. People are like, oh, they travel back to Persia and they're like, oh, I went to see Baha'u'lláh. Oh, all of this disperses everywhere, because you have to realize that all the Babis were pretty much dead. All the letters of the living were pretty much dead. So all of this availability of Baha'u'lláh in Baghdad is rebuilding the basis of a community that has almost been exterminated. And he is never going to be this social again, ever. He's never going to do this in Constantinople. And the more we get to Haifa and Akka, the less he is seen. By the end of his life, he almost never receives anyone. So this is a very, very special time in his life. And so many, one of the things I really love is his love of the people of Baghdad. There was this old woman who was about 80 years old. Every single day, I tell you, they knew where to find him, because this woman knew his path to go to his coffee shop, and she would just wait there just to see every single day, just to see him. And every single day he would stop, and every single day she'd kiss his hands, and every single day she tried to kiss his face, but he was too tall. So he would bring his face down and she would kiss his face, and he would ask about her house and ask about her family. And when he left Baghdad, he made sure that she was taken care of until the end of her life. Now, this is something that leaves traces, spiritual, that kind of love and kindness leaves traces over time. So Baghdad was really quite a special place. But one of the main reasons was really the fact that Baha'u'lláh revealed, like there's three times in his life where he revealed a copious rain. Like the revelation of Baha'u'lláh was like a rain. Once, Baghdad, 1856 to 1863. The second one is Adrianople, 1867, 1868. And the third one is Akka after 1877. There's lots of revelation, huge spurts of revelation in Mazra'i and Bahji. But this time, there was so much that the equivalent of the Quran was being revealed every day. So fast, people couldn't take it down. And what was taken down, Baha'u'lláh asked Mirza Akka Jan to take it and go wash it in the river, wash away the revelation. And Mirza Akka Jan said, you have to do this 50, 60 times. Hundreds of thousands of verses were washed away in the river Tigris. That's how much. So the spiritual transformation of the community of Baghdad in great part has to do with this copious rain. And Baha'u'llah's reach and influence got to such a level that everyone came to him, and very rich Persians would ask him to settle their estates. And of course, things don't go well for a long time without the balance of crisis and victory. And all of this created an enormous amount of jealousy in the hearts of two people. One was the new consul, whose name was, so Sheikh Abdul Hussein was a sheikh, and the new consul was Mirza Buzurg Khan Irazvini. And for 9 months, these two despicable people threw everything they had at Baha'u'lláh for 9 months. First, they started circulating fake dreams, talking about they were on a horse and a Babi came and shook a bottle of blood on them. And then they saw like the verses of the Quran in Latin and all this stuff. No one cared. No one cared. So then they moved on. They had a plan to assassinate Baha'u'lláh. So they hired this hitman, this Turkish hitman, Rida, who twice tried to kill Baha'u'lláh, but twice couldn't. Like once he tried to kill him in the market when Baha'u'lláh was walking with Mirza Musa, and he dropped his pistol, and Baha'u'lláh said, Mirza Musa, pick up the pistol and accompany our guest back to his house. And the other time he tried to kill him in the Turkish bath, and just realized he couldn't do it. Just couldn't kill Baha'u'lláh. So then they tried to have them deported. And then they tried to declare holy war on them. The Persian government gave them unilateral mandate. So they tried to declare holy war, but one mujtahid was very honest and didn't agree. And so then they asked him for a miracle. This is the famous, give us a miracle, and they couldn't agree on the miracle. So Baha'u'lláh didn't honor their request because they didn't make one. And then they sent a mob to assassinate him. But then Baha'u'lláh opened the door of the Most Great House and fed them rose water sherbet, and then they left. And as they left, they started screaming, "May God curse your enemies!" And Baha'u'lláh kept revealing tablets in the meantime. But the Book of Certitude, probably the one of the brightest emanations, the second brightest emanation of Baha'u'llah's mind after the Kitab-i Aqdas, was revealed immediately after this 9 month of opposition. And this book was really the answer to all of the questions that Muslims had, and it was circulated very widely for decades. And all of this eventually didn't stop because there was opposition to Baha'u'lláh that kept brewing in the background. And the second exile came around 1863. And Baha'u'lláh revealed the tablet of the Holy Mariner, warning of grave dangers ahead. And it really broke the heart of all the Babis who were going to stay behind. But something interesting happened right before the declaration, which is like in April, and the second exile was in March. Baha'u'lláh started revealing a tablet for every believer as a goodbye. And then he began revealing mystical tablets every single day for months before the revelation. So as this is like a further out, and then as the revelation came closer, he kept revealing tablets, and people were enraptured. So they were spiritually primed for the declaration. And the declaration is interesting. I think that if there is, let me just hold on. What is this? I can't access my window here. The long trip to Constantinople, all the way to Adrianople, was really, we have to talk about the proclamation of Baha'u'lláh, because we just saw the first one in Baghdad. That was stage 1 in April 1863. That was the first stage of Baha'u'llah's proclamation to the Babi followers in Baghdad, right? The second stage of Baha'u'llah's proclamation is the early part of his stay in Adrianople. And that is from 1865 to 1868, approximately. And that is Baha'u'lláh proclaiming that he is the one whom God shall make manifest, which he proclaimed to his followers in Baghdad, but to the communities of Adrianople, in Baghdad, and in Persia. And then the third stage of the revelation is the open proclamation. And that is open proclamation to the entire world, to all the kings and queens. And that is sort of the second half of what happens in Adrianople. Adrianople really is Mirza Yahya attacking. See, all the attacks of Mirza Yahya, all of the attempts on Baha'u'llah's life, to the point where people no longer live together. Until 10 March 1866, everyone lived together. But when Baha'u'lláh proclaimed his mission to Mirza Yahya, and Mirza Yahya refused him, this is 2 months after poisoning him, he responded to Baha'u'llah's open proclamation to him, which was the Suri-i-Am, written in his own post-poisoning handwriting. Baha'u'lláh revealed his mission to Mirza Yahya directly. And Mirza Yahya responded, you know what? I have a claim from God. I have a revelation from God. And I can tell you the hour, the day, and the time that God revealed himself to me. When Mirza Yahya responded that way, that was the most great separation. And Mirza Yahya and Sayyid Muhammad lied for months and went all the way to Constantinople to sully Baha'u'llah's name. And they lied about one thing that seems kind of trivial, but they lied about the allowance. They said that Baha'u'lláh was keeping the allowance. And when they said that, Baha'u'lláh came out of his seclusion and refused to ever perceive his allowance again, even selling his belongings. He divided his household, gave some to Mirza Yahya. And a Babi was visiting and said, well, I'm confused, you know, who is saying the truth here? I want to see a public confrontation, which is a Muslim tradition. And Baha'u'lláh said, okay. So they organized a debate or a confrontation, and Baha'u'lláh, the whole city saw him walk like a king to the mosque for this confrontation. And he did not show up. And it was extremely publicized. It was extremely publicized at the time. I mean, everyone in Constantinople knew. They knew what Baha'u'lláh had done that day. And that was the end of that was the public break in the separation. And what happened is that this last phase of the proclamation of Baha'u'lláh came immediately after. Immediately after. The public confrontation was in September 1867. And the Suri Muluk was in September, October 1867, the next month. How am I doing on time, Eric?
Well, you know, you take the time you need. I mean, we've been an hour now, just about.
Okay. Are there any questions so far?
Let's hear it from the friends. Yes, the floor is
You can take a
yours.
little break to take questions.
Shem, this is fascinating. So we have Andrea. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, just to check the pronoun. You said he did not show up. You meant Mirza Yahya did not. Correct?
I couldn't hear you. You were broken up.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Would you mind repeating?
You just explained that there was a public meeting, like a debate arranged, and that Baha'u'lláh walked like a king. And then you said he did not show up, and I think you meant Mirza Yahya.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks, Andrea.
Any other question for anyone? I mean, this is fascinating. I haven't made some notes. I'm dumbfounded.
Okay, so I'll just, if there's no questions, I'll just zip through the rest and try to see if I can get to the end of the chronology in the next 15 minutes. The Suri Muluk is probably the most important tablet of Baha'u'lláh. And when I was reading it, I made this little graphic myself to see who is addressed in the Suri Muluk, you know, like the Sultan Abdulaziz is addressed, but the kings of the earth are also addressed. The ministers of Sultan Abdulaziz are addressed. So it's the proclamation of Baha'u'lláh goes through also stages where the Suri Muluk really, it's about sort of the Sultan Abdulaziz, his ministers, the kings of the earth, the people of Constantinople. And then little by little, Baha'u'llah's proclamation was going to continue as Baha'u'lláh moves on in his life. So he's going to keep writing tablets to kings, and they're going to change slightly in tone and in range also. He writes his first tablet to Napoleon. He writes the Lahi Sultan to Nasiruddin Shah, which is not delivered for 1 year until Badi delivers it the next year. So after Adrianople, Baha'u'lláh is brought to the Most Great Prison. And now he's in the Holy Land, and this is where Baha'u'lláh is going to pass away. This is where he's going to spend the last 24 years of his life. This is the end of his life. He arrives in the Most Great Prison. And when he first enters the citadel, so this is sort of like a graphic of all the people that entered the Most Great Prison with him. There was his family around him, Asiya Khanum, Mirza Mehdi, Bahá'í Khanum, and ʻAbdu'l-Bahá. And then extended family, so his brother's wives, his second wife, I think, was there. Then believers, women and men. See, there's a sizable amount of women that were there. There were also children and babies, breastfeeding babies. And then there were two Azalis, two followers of Mirza Yahya. So the Most Great Prison, obviously, is a time of great suffering because all 67 exiles fall sick when they arrive, and ʻAbdu'l-Bahá heals them. And shortly after they arrive, in October 1868, the German Templars arrive in Haifa, and they are looking for Baha'u'lláh. And they arrive a couple of months after him. And of course, they will never realize that he is the one they're looking for. And Baha'u'lláh will write tablets to them. There is a tablet that he wrote to the German Templars. And so his proclamation continues, even though he's in the most great prison. He reveals another tablet to, what's his name? Ali Pasha, the second tablet to Ali Pasha. And in earnest, the second phase of his proclamation to the kings and rulers begins when he reveals the Suri Haikal, which is probably the most difficult work that Baha'u'lláh has revealed. It's considered one of his most difficult works. And this is sort of an abstract representation of the 5 rulers in the shape of a very thin golden star here, addressed in the Suri Haikal. There's the Pope, from a detail from a Vatican miniature, the Nicholas II, the Tsar of Russia, Nasiruddin Shah, the Shah of Persia, Queen Victoria, a detail from the Book of Kells. And this is Révolution guidant le peuple. It's a French painting of the French Revolution to Napoleon III. So these are the 5, and they're going to be written in the shape of a pentacle, a 5-pointed star. But, so these are all the rulers that he writes. And this is who's going to deliver the Lahi Sultan, the tablet to Nasiruddin Shah. This is Badi, and Badi is one of the few examples of people that were completely recreated by entering Baha'u'llah's presence. There's at least 4 or 5 that I've been able to identify so far that he says were recreated. Like Varka was one of them, Badi was one of them, Nabili Akbar was one of them. People completely made anew. And so he was a water carrier. This is a water carrier. So he carried a skin like this, and he was able to enter Akka because he was very humble. These are like the humblest of the humble. The water carriers were like the lowest on the echelon of society. So he went into Baha'u'llah's presence, and he walked all the way from Haifa through Trebizond and Tabriz, Tehran, all the way to Lar, where the Shah was. And he handed the tablet to the Shah, saying, "O king, I have come to thee from Sheba with a weighty message." And the Shah immediately knew this was a Baha'i. And so he had him, the Shah had him tortured. And in fact, the torturers told the Shah that he was so courageous and didn't say a single word under torture that the Shah sent a court photographer to take pictures of Badi. And these pictures of Badi were commissioned by the Shah because he liked to see the people he was torturing. So he had this court photographer go and take the pictures of him. And then like eventually they just couldn't get anything out of Badi, so they just smashed his head in and killed him. And there was a huge famine in Iran. This is a picture of a later famine in Iran, as divine retribution for the martyrdom of Badi. And the hand of the cause, Haji Akun, wrote to Baha'u'lláh begging him to end the suffering of Iran. And Baha'u'lláh agreed. But this is one of 2 times in Baha'u'llah's life that I know of, 2 or 3 times in his life, that after Badi's martyrdom, Baha'u'lláh revealed hundreds of tablets for him for 3 years. Every single tablet he mentioned was either about Badi or mentioned Badi. It was an huge amount of pain. Shortly after that, there started to be first pilgrims coming to the Holy Land. Baha'i started settling in Haifa, Nazareth. Colonels in the army became Baha'is. There was a sort of a shift of attitude a little bit. And then on the 22nd of June, Mirza Mihdi fell from the skylight while he was saying his prayers. He forgot to count his steps. And he died on the 24th of June, having begged his father for the pilgrims to attain pilgrimage, to attain to Baha'u'lláh, and Baha'u'lláh granted his wish. But one of the interesting things is I got very curious because I heard from Baha'i accounts in Nazareth and in Akka that when the body of this pure soul was placed in the ground shook And I got curious as to what, if there had been an earthquake in Israel. So I started researching like academic journals for earthquakes and geology and all this stuff. And I found that on the 24th of June, there indeed was an earthquake that hit both Akka and Jerusalem and Nazareth, where Nabil was, where he felt the earthquake. And it took place from 4 to 5 p.m. on that day. So we know the hour of Mirza Mehdi's funeral. So after this opened a whole new period in Baha'u'llah's life. He and his family, these very pure and saintly beings, were now no longer in a prison. They were in the city. They were in 5 houses in the city, moving around in the city. They were living in the Khani Avamid, and their influence would eventually penetrate into the hearts of the people, but not before a very, 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 very tragic event. The covenant breakers who were there was 2 of them, a third one joined their rank. So a third one, and that created a momentum. And they started causing so much trouble, lying and misrepresenting Baha'u'lláh and just so much so that the Baha'is became extremely nervous and angry and agitated. And they did, and the covenant breakers forged Baha'u'llah's tablets. They told people they were becoming Sunni Muslims. So one day to the next, everything changed for Baha'u'lláh and the Babis, because on the 22nd of January, 1872, 7 Baha'is, including very loyal, very faithful, very deep in Baha'is, murdered 3 of the Azalis, and everything fell apart. So Baha'u'lláh was arrested, as was ʻAbdu'l-Bahá, and they were brought to the Khani, where was it? The Khani Khavirdi, and they were released maybe 72 hours later, after the governor of Beirut was very angry with the governor of Akka. And they were released, and they asked them to they apologized. And after this crisis, of course, the murderers were imprisoned for 7 years, but about 16 innocent Babis were rounded up and imprisoned for about 6 months. But after this, things started really changing, because Baha'u'llah's innocence had been proven, and things started happening that would change the people of Akka's perception of Baha'u'lláh. So ʻAbdu'l-Bahá and Munir Khanum were married shortly after this event, about a year after this event. And there was a new governor that came. Baha'u'lláh revealed the Kitab-i Aqdas. And this is sort of a graphic I made of the series of crises and victories in Baha'u'llah's life from 1844 to 1873, around this time. And slowly, Baha'u'llah's reputation grew, and his majesty became renowned. People started begging to be in his presence. He moved into the house of Abud, which was a stately house, and more and more widespread recognition of Baha'u'lláh, until he said to someone that he hadn't seen greenery in about 9 years. And this is when ʻAbdu'l-Bahá made it his mission to rent a garden. He rented the garden of Rizvan a couple of years before that and started preparing it. And then he rented the mansion of Mazrai. And when he realized, after organizing a banquet, that the limit of staying within the city limits was no longer really a strict limit for them, he attempted to convince Baha'u'lláh to move to Mazrai, but Baha'u'lláh wouldn't, because he said he was a prisoner. So he enlisted the help of the Mufti of Akka, who begged Baha'u'lláh for hours on end, until Baha'u'lláh finally agreed. And then he would enter the last 15 years of his life, which are really years of glory and majesty. Really, he started, and at this point in his life, he saw the Baha'is, and he saw them at feasts and holy days, and he had people around him, but he never really granted interviews anymore, except very exceptionally. And he just spent a lot of time revealing tablets, and he had a little white donkey, and he would just go exploring. He would go into the countryside and in the Druze villages, and there was about 7 or 8 different gardens, and pilgrims came very freely. But of course, there was still the king and the beloved of martyrs were martyred in 1879. And after this, for years, Baha'u'lláh revealed hundreds of tablets in praise of the king and beloved of martyrs. So, crisis and victory followed Baha'u'lláh until the very end of his life. The Holy Family stayed in Akka because Asiya Khanum was very, very weak after decades of exile. She was too weak to travel, and travel would have been by donkey. It would have been too hard for her. But Baha'u'lláh wrote her so many loving letters in those years, and we have them all. The letters that he writes about her, asked about her health, and he spent half the year with her in Akka. He visited Akka very often. So towards the end of Baha'u'llah's life, in the mansion of Bahçi, a few things that are very important happened. He revealed a lot of the important tablets that were revealed after the Kitab-i Aqdas, the sort of the Kalimat Firdausiyyah, words of paradise, Ishrakat, Tajaliyat, Tarazat, all of those. And then he has years of loss, where first Khadija Begum dies in 1882, then his beloved wife Asiya Khanum dies in 1886, and then his brother dies in 1887, and his beloved grandson Hussein Effendi dies in 1888. So that's a lot of loss for Baha'u'lláh, 1 year after another for a period of 6 years or so. And then he meets Edward Granville Brown, who is really just amazed at meeting Baha'u'lláh. And that's sort of the end. After this, the biggest thing that happens is that Baha'u'lláh goes to Haifa and indicates to ʻAbdu'l-Bahá where the shrine of the Bab should be built, and that will become one of ʻAbdu'l-Bahā's main objectives for his ministry. So towards the end, Baha'u'lláh really gave ʻAbdu'l-Bahá main objectives. And then in this year is when Baha'u'lláh does something absolutely extraordinary, and he writes the Kitab-i Ahd, the Book of the Covenant, that secures the covenant in the hands of ʻAbdu'l-Bahá, and is written in both Persian and Arabic to make sure everybody understands. He says it twice very clearly. And then, shortly before he left, Baha'u'lláh said he was so tired of this world, and he had to take his flight. He had to leave, and he had a fever. So for 9 days he was ill. The fever came and went, and he said all his goodbyes to his family and to all the women in the family. He brought them, and he said that ʻAbdu'l-Bahá would take care of them. He had made provisions for this. And then when he passed away, ʻAbdu'l-Bahá sent a telegram to the Sultan, very poetic, very heartbreaking telegram. He said, the sun of Bahá has set. And he informed the Sultan that he planned to inter Baha'u'lláh on the grounds, and the Sultan had no objection. And one of the believers who had originally, he was the one who wanted to kill Baha'u'lláh when he was in the prison. So he came in with a knife, and Baha'u'lláh said, you can come when you leave the knife. Then he came again a second time and thought I could just strangle him with my hands. And he said, no, you can come when you get rid of your evil intentions. And then he went home, and he really wanted to meet Baha'u'lláh. He wanted to meet him out of love the third time. This same man remained a very faithful friend, smuggled Baha'i pilgrims in to see Baha'u'lláh for years. And then when Baha'u'lláh was laid to rest, he was the one who camped his tent in the shrine while they were rebuilding the wall for 7 days. He kept watch over Baha'u'lláh. So it's very sweet. Very heartbreaking that ʻAbdu'l-Bahá asked Nabil to compile the tablet of visitation for Baha'u'lláh. And the tablet of visitation is made of 7 paragraphs in English. As you know, there are no paragraphs in Arabic and Persian. But the first 4 paragraphs are for one tablet that was to a man named Aka Baba. Then paragraphs 5 and 6 come from another tablet. And paragraph 7, half of the paragraph comes from one tablet and half of the paragraph comes from another tablet. I always love that the tablet of visitation for Baha'u'lláh is a compilation, because it's almost like Baha'u'llah's ascension broke all the rules and broke all the molds. A tablet that was revealed could not have served to express that pain. It had to be made from a compilation to express the pain of losing Baha'u'lláh, you know? Of course, Nabil couldn't handle the pain, so he threw himself in the Mediterranean after the passing of Baha'u'lláh. The same would happen 30 years later when ʻAbdu'l-Bahá died. Somebody felt his passing coming and couldn't live. I mean, it's a kind of love that's mysterious, because they couldn't live in a world where they weren't, you know? So many glowing tributes to Baha'u'lláh. But of course, the covenant breakers reared their heads and stole the cases from ʻAbdu'l-Bahá. So in those cases, incidentally, was the correction, the version of Nabil, of the Dawnbreakers, Nabil's narrative, with Baha'u'llah's corrections on it, was in the cases that were stolen. So we don't have the corrections, we just have the corrected version. And so when the Kitabi-Aqd was read, it was sort of like a test of faithfulness. The people who were faithful to the covenant abided by the provisions of the Kitabi-Aqd and followed ʻAbdu'l-Bahá with no questions, and those who didn't were lost in error, and so from the beginning broke the covenant. So Mirza Akhajan had a moment where he claimed that he had written some of the things that Baha'u'lláh revealed in his voice, and so he made a statement that he had lied and that every word that he had written down was Baha'u'llah's. Then, of course, Nabil threw himself into the sea. A few months after, a year after, on the 23rd of September, 1893, the name of Baha'u'lláh was publicly spoken in the West for the first time at the world's first religions parliament in Chicago in 1893. And then in 1893 in Russia, the first ever publication of the Kitabi-Aqd by Baha'u'lláh, which is a really fascinating paper written by Christopher Buck and Yuli Ioannessian. And he was never forgotten, you know, even 4 years after his passing, a poet of Lebanon wrote a poem about Baha'u'lláh. And so this is sort of a survey of his ministry, which is sing it. And then you can continue the story with the first chronology I wrote, The Extraordinary Life of ʻAbdu'l-Bahá, which takes place, this will just take you to 1892, when ʻAbdu'l-Bahá becomes the center of the covenant, and the story goes on. There you go, I'm done.
Wow, thank you very much, Violetta. It was incredible. and I must tell the friends, you know, what has been covered now it's actually a drop in relation to the amount of information that you have compiled. You know, it's incredible.
Yeah.
I'm still busy with it. I mean, I've started weeks ago, and I'm still busy with it. It is quite incredible.
Oh, so great.
Thank
Yeah,
you
we
so
started
much.
it was like a zip through. I mean, that's like 400 pages of text. So we just went through 400 pages of history real quick.
Real quick, you know, that's quite a feat. Yeah, well done for doing it.
There's someone who asked if I ever came across any image of Asiya Khanum. The only images we have of her are pen portraits, like descriptions of her, that she had like the color of her skin, and she had like dark blue eyes, like navy blue eyes, and she was very tall and slender and graceful, but there are no pictures of her.
Thank you for the question, Lisa. We have another one from Sue, actually, which brings to our attention that today is the 90th anniversary of the passing of the greatest holy leaf.
Thank you.
Truth be told. And so if if you have a little story you can share, because I personally know you're full of stories.
I do. I can show you something here. Let me just.
Thank you
Let's
for
see.
your question.
Yeah, that's great. We can like honor her by looking at a few different like points of her life. This is part of a talk I'm going to give in Portugal, and I have a whole section on Bahá'í here, and we can look at her. Just so one of the most important things to remember about Bahá'í is that she held the covenant for two centers of the covenant, for Bahá'u'lláh and for ʻAbdu'l-Bahá and for Shoghi Effendi. Because for when ʻAbdu'l-Bahá, let me just open this here. It'll be easier with images because you'll have like something to. Oh, okay. Let's see. Let me just close this. Sorry, for some reason my internet is kind of slow. So it's interesting because the same process happened for ʻAbdu'l-Bahá and for Shoghi Effendi in 1921. No, in 1921 for Shoghi Effendi, and in 1892 for ʻAbdu'l-Bahá. Very important to remember. The same process happened when they were given the will and testament of Bahá'u'lláh and the will and testament of ʻAbdu'l-Bahá were read, even though ʻAbdu'l-Bahá must have known in some sort of sense that he was the only qualified candidate, it was still an extreme shock for him. It was still an extreme shock for him, and the pain of the covenant breaking was so much that he left 2 or 3 times Akka and went to Mount Carmel, to the cave of Elijah for a few months, for a month maybe, and then he went also for some time in 1895 to Tiberias, because of the pressures of covenant breaking and the pressures of being the center of the covenant, the pressure of the station. That pressure of the station happened also to Shoghi Effendi. And Shoghi Effendi, so this is during the ministry of ʻAbdu'l-Bahá. This is the picture is not great. I colorized it myself, so it's not a professional job like they do at the Holy Land. But I just wanted to sort of give her like a skin color, to make her more alive. And these are sort of the 3 times in ʻAbdu'l-Bahā's ministry that she held the covenant, right? At the beginning, when he went to Tiberias and to the cave of Elijah, the middle picture is the 3 years that he left to go to the Holy Land. We don't realize how come the center of the covenant could have left Haifa that long, because he had Bahiya Hanum. And Shoghi Effendi considered Bahiya Hanum almost the feminine equivalent of ʻAbdu'l-Bahá, because she had all the perfections of character. She was a perfect example. She was an outstanding heroine. She was just, her station was only understood by 3 people, by Bahá'u'lláh, ʻAbdu'l-Bahá, and Shoghi Effendi. We have no understanding of the vastness of her station. And then in the end down here, this is when ʻAbdu'l-Bahá went to all the trips he did to the Jordan Valley during the war to get the wheat for the First World War, to feed the people. So this is Tiberias. This is where he went in Tiberias in 1895. This is for 3 years. He went to all these different places, and she was holding down the fort. And there were still active covenant breakers at the time. He left her in charge of a very, very sensitive situation. When ʻAbdu'l-Bahá died, she held everything together for 31 days until Shoghi Effendi could arrive. She sent cables to the whole world. She organized the funeral. She decided where to bury him, where to bury ʻAbdu'l-Bahá. And then Shoghi Effendi became the guardian. He was 24 years old. He stayed for a few months from December 1921. And by April 1922, he had to leave. He left for 8 months. For 8 months, she answered letters, sent cablegrams, organized, gave people advice on how to organize the community. And then she would write letters to people telling them how to maintain control over the communities and to protect and shield the stronghold of the faith from the onslaught of the enemies. These are all community building letters from Bahiya Hanum. And hostilities in Iran, she would write letters to the whole communities in the world about hostilities in Iran as well. Shoghi Effendi also left the World Center because of the pressures in so in the summer of 1922, in the summer of 1923, and the summer of 1924, for months at a time each time. And the whole time that was always, and for the first years in his ministry, he would always write, we, you know, me and Bahiya Hanum, we. Yeah, it's very, very touching. So she had responsibilities in the Holy Land, but she also, her love for Shoghi Effendi was so much that anytime she could hear him walk in the house, she would ask him to come inside her room and she would feed him. She would watch him eat, and then she would watch him go to the shrine, and she loved to watch him walk. The love between them was like, I think it's Shoghi Effendi who describes it as a celestial love. It's a very, 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 very powerful love. And so many tablets of Baha'u'lláh about Bahiya Hanum and her passing, and just, yeah, so that's just a little bit, a small, quick tribute to Bahiya Hanum on the anniversary of her passing.
Thank you very much. Woo, friends, I don't know about you, but that was pretty amazing. Incredible work you've done yet again. I mean, I recommend the Extraordinary Life of ʻAbdu'l-Bahá as well, which is as in-depth and comprehensive. It's incredible. You have a real talent. You know, it's an honor and privilege to have you with us. Thank you for taking the time to share. And there are wonderful quotes and prayers and shares, and the friends have definitely appreciated. Yes, the video will indeed placed on YouTube, and the link provided to the friends who wants it. I will make sure to send it to all the friends that are personally invited, and forward it to dear Violetta, who will share it with other friends as well. See, absolutely wonderful. Thank you, rich presentation. Thank you. Love, love, love.
You're all so nice. No, you know what? One of the things about Baha'i history is that it's not about the past. Because Baha'i history is about spiritual forces, it is about the present and the future and the past. And I really believe that when we connect deeply to Baha'i history, it really can make our connection to the covenant much more powerful, and it can make our communities more vibrant. Because when you look at Baha'i history, you can see ways of applying lessons in everyday life. And it can keep you going, you know, especially how they dealt with so much opposition, with so much class and so much strength and so much, it's
wonderful. So here we go. I've got you here. Yes, here's for history. Who would have thought? You know. So, friends, I think that will be all for today. I mean, thank you so much for dear Violetta to give us that very special tours, and thank you all of you to attend this event. It wouldn't be an event without all of us attending.
Yes,
and you know, stay blessed. Allah Apa. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hello.
So nice to see you all here.
Allahu Akbar.
Have a great day. Have a great night wherever you are.
Thank you a lot.
In Ireland.
Oh, wonderful. I love Ireland.
Thank you. It was beautiful. Thank you, Violetta.
Oh, thank you so much, Prudence. So nice to see you.
Thank you. We actually need one for our kids, hey? Something shorter for the kids as well.
Sure, of course.